And it is Good Morning Uganda agenda. Today we are going to be discussing issues regarding the national budget. We know already the budget framework paper is underway, and of course before Parliament the budget process for financial year 2023-24 is already underway. It commenced. And so much is in this, but we want to look at a very important issue, that is borrowing. Many times we've talked about public debt. Bank of Uganda came out and said, well, our debt is still manageable. But to finance next financial year's budget, that is 2023-2024, government intends to borrow 9.6 trillion. This money is going to aid in the financing of this budget. 1.5 trillion is going to be borrowed here. That is domestic borrowing from Uganda. And the rest, which is about 8.3, is going to be borrowed from other foreign sources. Now, we are looking at a budget of about 49 trillion. That's for the financial year 2023-2024. Now, URA intends to collect about 28.8 trillion from you Ugandans. Now, where do we get the balance of that money? Of course, what we expect to get when we add what we shall collect and some grants, we may have about 31 trillion, meaning there will be a balance of some money which is planned to be borrowed. Joining me on set is an economist from Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, that is CSBAG, with whom we are going to be discussing more regarding this borrowing, its implication, but also looking into budget financing generally. And I have, and I'm honored to have, that is Rubangakene Patrick, an economist with CSBAG. You're most welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. Good morning, sir, and good morning, viewers for UBC. As I've been introduced, my name is Rubangakene Patrick. I work with the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. This is a group that really advocates for a budget that dignifies humanity. So as we today discuss issues of public debt, there is a deep connection between the debt that we attract as a country and how it affects service delivery. So when you look at what is on table today, we are aware that the budget process is ongoing, and the Minister of Finance tabled the National Budget Framework Paper for financial 23-24 in Parliament just at the end of last year. And now Parliament is going to start scrutinizing this budget this month. And this gives us an opportunity, as civil society, as Ugandans, to really interrogate and ask, is this budget, the financing aspect of it, because you did mention how much are we contributing as Ugandans and how much of it is coming as debt. Is this debt sustainable or not? Because we have seen countries that have already derailed because of huge debts. The best example now is Ghana, and Ghana has failed to service its external debt. So the fear is, are we moving in that direction as Uganda or not? Because if you had to unpack what this debt is all about, for starters, we must admit debt is not something bad.
Yeah, we all borrow.
We all borrow.
Business people work on loans.
Even at household level, we borrow. Once you don't have enough to finance your activities, definitely you'll borrow. But the question is, what do you use that money for, the one that you borrow? So it's the utilization of the money that we borrow that counts. Because there are discussions out there. There are countries which have huge amount of debt, but they are moving on because they're in position to generate more revenue and service that. So in our case, we are borrowing, which is fine. But now, if you look at the proportion of this money to our gross domestic product, our GDP, it's already at around 48%. And we have a threshold of 50 that's where the charter for the fiscal responsibility states we shouldn't go beyond the 50.
The red tape.
Yes, the red tape is 50. But again, when you look at the projections that are coming from the budget, we shall be crossing that mark. By June, we would have reached around 53%. So that means we would have gone above the 50% threshold, which now poses the question, shall we be in position to service that debt? Yes or no? When you look at what brought us here to this current situation, there are certain triggers. One, we have not been collecting enough resources domestically as a country. We have very few Ugandans who are in the tax register. Around only 2 million Ugandans. If you look at the records from URA, only 2 million Ugandans.
And slightly less than that.
Yeah, 2 million. You imagine, like 2 million Ugandans are the ones shouldering this burden. Those are the companies, the individuals, they compose the 2 million. Those are the people in the tax register. And they are the ones shouldering this burden to really generate the revenue that as a country would require in our development aspiration. So of the 2 million, not all of them are actively paying taxes. Almost half are evading tax. So that calls the question, is URA doing enough to bring more Ugandans, more businesses on board to pay taxes? Another trigger, it has been our appetite for infrastructure development. Over the last close to 10 years as a country, we borrowed so much to finance our infrastructure development. You look at the dams that we have in this country, because we had issues to do with energy, and the government was borrowing, developing Isimba Dam, Karuma Dam. We had the oil roads in Bunyoro. Yes, they're all beautiful, but the question is, what we borrowed to develop those infrastructure has now brought us to this current situation, which now we need to manage as a country, because short of that, a default could happen. Now
also, Patrick, help our viewers understand, our budgets have consecutively been increasing.
True.
You had a 27, now you're going to, you move from there, you have a 40 something, 48, now you're going to 49. I predict maybe we shall even reach 50. One thing is, as it is increasing, yes, we must also say collections are increasing.
True.
Because we are improving in ways of funding, domestic funding, from about 25 domestic, now we are looking at 28.8 domestic revenue. That is money collected. There is an improvement. But should our budgets continue progressively increasing, if we do not, and should we continue borrowing to do more, yet even we are not properly? Yes, one would say when you look at our budgets, among the first three priorities where we give a lot of money is public debt financing. Yes, we say we are giving a lot of money from our budget to debt financing. But one would wonder, should we continue saying we shall have that, we shall have this, or should we now look at a time of saying, hey, these may be hard times, like the Bank of Uganda increased the CBR, saying, yes, now borrowing may be hard for you, but this is one of the ways you can limit inflation or try to control inflation a bit. Shouldn't we look at a time of saying, either we have slight increase, this may hinder some of this problem, but we try to see how best to manage the debt?
I think the question here is now, how do we manage the debt? Because we have already reached where we are. So it's a point where...
But you continue to get more and increase more of what?
No, you see, the challenge here is the demands are really high. And you remember when I gave you the narrative how we reached here. So it was a long journey.
We needed the good roads.
We needed the good
electricity
roads.
dams.
All that, we needed it, but it came at a cost. But now, as we always say, debt is not a problem. How we utilize that debt, and also the composition of the debt. Because if you look at a government like Uganda, over the years, most of our debt had been domestic debt. Because now, there's a huge reduction from the past financial year, which it was close to 5 trillion. And we should appreciate that government has woken up. At least in this coming financial year 23-24, our domestic debt is reducing to 1.5
it's about 1.5
trillion, which is within the benchmark of 1% of the GDP. So now, the structure of the debt matters. So we need to see government.
I think domestic debt, they're usually non-concessional.
They are non-concessional.
Yes,
the rates are really high.
And the rates are high.
Because it's easy for them to contract. Because when you are to get those concessional loans, there are lots of processes that you have to undergo. And as such, we need to see how do we structure our debt. We need to see domestic borrowing going down and more of the concessional loans that government contracts. And we also reduce on the non-concessional loans, because that is where the challenge is, because their rates are so high. Because if you look at the coming financial year, of the 8.3 trillion that we are going to borrow externally, now look at its composition. Concessional loans comprises of around 3 trillion, non-concessional loans 2.8 trillion. Then now you look at the domestic loan borrowing, which is around 1.5. So you can see the margins. So that means so much is still going to non-concessional. That is 2.8. It's a lot.
And maybe just for our viewers, non-concessional loans, one, they have high interest rates. Two, they have a shorter term of payment. Concessional loans have less interest rates, but then you have a longer period of payment. Now, that is what we mean by non-concessional loans and concessional loans when Patrick is talking about that. And most governments would prefer concessional loans. But I don't know, either they are hard to come by.
No, it's
we have poor negotiators.
Yes, you do, because most of the people who give you those loans are the big entities, the IMF, the World Bank. So they have some conditions that are really attached to for you to have access to such loans, and that affects most of our governments because of the tedious process, and yet we would require money and find ourselves going for these low-hanging loans from the domestic market and others which are non-concessional. But that also comes with a pressure, because as a country we want services. But are we really having enough to deliver services? Because the budget is increasing, for example, from the 48.5 to a projection of around 49 trillion. But what should surprise you, the discretionary resources. Now, the monies that the government has at its disposal to deliver services. Look at the 49, the budget is what? 49.9 trillion. Then what is available for services that would require human capital development, agro-industrialization? We want to see good roads. All these that we crave for as a country, we only have 22 trillion. So that means all what is left are going for statutory expenditures. Interest rates are coming in. Our interest rates are really high as a country, that we are going to now be servicing this debt. We have amortization servicing these external loans, which is close to 2.something trillion in this coming financial year. So now that means money that would have been available to deliver services, which we crave for, drugs in hospitals, good roads.
Out of the 49, it's just
22.8 trillion, which is even now a reduction. In this current financial year of 22-23, what was there available was around 25.4 trillion. So that shows the burden of debt. So now from 25.4, there's a reduction to 22.8 trillion. So someone will look at the budget is increasing, but what is available? I think what is available to deliver services has gone down. So much as we are celebrating our budget has increased and what, but when you really go deep and try to understand, you'll really see, yes, there is this increment, but in actual sense, we have felt a reduction of close to 3 trillion.
Well, that is a bit very complicated in its way, because that means some of the services, even that we were getting, it may be very hard. But Patrick, I want also to take you back. When we talk about these loans that we are borrowing, one, you talked about capacity of repayment. But I want us also to look at, ability to pay them back or service them. Let's also look at choice of enterprises of priorities. For years, we've spent so much in infrastructure. But I look at, do we look at this money as borrowed money that must have an impact? I'll give you an example. When people crave for a road, and even go and tell a member of parliament or anybody, when you don't work on this road, we are not going to vote for you. This is our maker, these roads, that road, and then we end up constructing a road. Earlier on in this show, I told my co-host, and I told her that there is a part of this country, for most of the times I've gone there, you drive on this road, you find the youth in the evening, they come sit on the road, by the roadside, sometimes even some you wonder, why? Because their faces are not facing at the road, but their backs. Then at some hours, what you find there is cassava, put alongside, dried on a tarmac. So this road could have been constructed on borrowed money, but the rate of return, though we say some of these projects is over a period of years, this has taken years, there is no rate of return. You know, when you borrow to construct an hospital, yes, we don't expect much, but we know that if this hospital is treating productive people, they are giving back to the economy. You know, that when people fall sick, because either they are in agriculture, they're in a mining sector, there is economic activity. Do we look at, are they in tandem, the infrastructure developments that we are putting in these monies? How do we make them be able to reflect? It is different from when you borrow a loan and you construct the Entebbe Express Highway, and people are going to pass on this road, and you're going to collect this amount of money, you know, if we go for such loans. Now, in a period of maybe 10 years, the people using this road will be able to pay, to help government pay back. But sometimes I feel either priorities, technicalities, how do we overcome that? Because we are demanding infrastructure every time. We don't have masanyas, and you ask how many people are using electricity for productive purposes. We're from watching, seeing light, you know. If power doesn't come out, voting is, and then we end up extending Nenoga to say. But some of this money is loans.
Okay, so what you bring on table is quite interesting, and it's something that we have been really having a discussion with as civil society, and it's one of the issues we have been raising to government. Motivated. Now the issue is the public investment management. You see, most of the loans that we contract as a country are for public investments. And you have mentioned, be it roads, be it hospitals, there are so many public investments. So that means government is investing for a public good, for me and you to benefit in. Now, the biggest challenge that we have been facing as a country when it comes to public investment management, it's the readiness. We have projects in this country where they are not fully screened and they are not ready to receive money. But as a country, we have gone ahead to borrow. For example, you could be having a road project. I think the best example, you just have a look at the Northern Bypass. This is a road that has spent close to 20 years. Now, that shows you this project, by the time government conceived the idea, they were not ready. They are not clear, the project affected persons, the right of way. Because as they kept on constructing, there were sections they couldn't, because people were not consenting to whatever government is offering. So for every project that we have, there are components, there are projects that would require counterpart funding that government of Uganda should. For example, you go borrow money from China to construct maybe a road. China will say, of this money that you are borrowing, we are willing to give you. But what is your contribution as a government? Government could say, we are also going to contribute maybe 10% for this project. But now, China's money gets ready, but on our side, we are not ready. Remember, we have already contracted their money, and we start paying commitment fees. Early, even before. You can imagine. So now that's where these kind of interest rates payments, the commitment fees, they go up because of lack of readiness. So projects are not ready, but we go ahead and borrow for this. And this came out so clear in the last audit report. The Auditor General sampled a total of 371 projects. Of the sampled projects, 342 projects worth 39 trillion. Look at the magnitude of money that overstayed in the project implementation plan. You see, there is a platform where projects are all channeled. So now you can imagine projects worth 39 trillion, they are there. That means cost overruns are there, time overruns that outlive the time they should have been implemented. So that means this 39 trillion, have we really benefited as a country from it because of these delays in project executions? So this comes way back. Yes, we appreciate the efforts where government has really tried to improve on public investment management, they build capacities of their planners and economists. They have even brought in systems to try to reduce this burden. We appreciate that. However, what is really missing to address this issue? A legal framework. A public investment management legal framework is missing in this country. So the sooner we address that, we put in a legal framework, then that helps us in addressing some of these challenges that we are facing. Because that's where the bulk of the monies are, and we are not moving. We have borrowed so much for these projects. These projects are not ready. We're already paying commitment funds. Me and you, who should be the intended beneficiary, we are not benefiting from this, these projects. Look at Lubowa. These are monies that are borrowed. But have you seen it kickstart? But as a country, we should be paying that. So that means we need to start screening. Unless a project is ready, no money should be committed to it. I think, so that we reduce on the burden. And that will stop us, that appetite, it tames that appetite to borrow more money. We only borrow for what we need and when we are ready. So that's where now it becomes the utilization component for this debt. Because if we don't, interest rates payments are going up, servicing this loan, the cost is going up, and what is left for us gets smaller and smaller every day. Then there's this issue. Yes, the debt is really huge. But there's some hope anyway. Because if you look at the public debt management framework,
where Bank of Uganda encouraged,
there are some indicators which still point well on our side, which we can say, hey, maybe.
What are those indicators? Because,
for example, if you look at the percentage of debt that are maturing in 1 year's time, we have around 24.4%. Again, it's a benchmark of 30. So you can see, yes, much as we have this, most of this debt are not within this 1 year's period. So that means we still have some room, but now you see the margin is narrowing, 24.4 compared to 30. So if we don't curtail it, we may reach that benchmark. So there are some positives. Again, when you look at the average time for these debts here to be maturing, currently it's around 6.7 years. Again, it's a benchmark of 5. So there's some hope in there, but we shouldn't fight to
reduce the chances of the hope that we have.
Yes, the hope that we have, we shouldn't fight to really say, because the debt which is maturing the next 1 year, 30%, we shouldn't reach that mark. We should start going back to a comfortable zone. Because once we crowd all these loans within 1 year, that means more resources will still go towards debt servicing. Yeah.
Well, viewer, thank you for being with us. We are still looking at the 9.6 proposed, that is trillion loan that government plans to get, and this is going to finance the next financial year. That is the budget for 2023-2024. Now, we are looking at a budget of about, that is 49 trillion, and we are looking at getting that is the 9.6 to be able to fund that budget. We are also hopeful that if all goes well, Ugandans will be able to contribute about 27.7 or I mean 28.8 that is going to be collected by URA. If we add on some grants, then we shall have about 31 trillion. So that brings the balance of the 9.6 to have our full budget of the 49-something trillion budget. What is interesting here is many people have raised the red flag when it comes to borrowing as a country. We've told you there will be domestic borrowing of about 1.5 trillion, money that is going to be borrowed, where you also go and borrow. And I don't know, but I know most borrowers prefer doing business with government.
True.
Compared to individuals. Now, this will mean that this increases the interest rate. And the chances may be minimal for the domestic borrower who is not government. Also, when you look at this money, what is going to be borrowed outside Uganda, the 8.3, you have concessional and non-concessional loans. And usually this is where I want to bring in Patrick again. Patrick, I've been following parliamentary proceedings, and I want to give you one or two incidents where one time even our minister said this was a bad loan. One time we were told even if we are to cancel getting this fleet, then the repercussions of what we must pay will be so grave. So we rather borrow money and purchase rather than failing to purchase. We've always had the Finance Committee of Parliament questioning who bargained. Why of all loans did we go for this one? You know, this was a bad loan. We regret if we maybe wouldn't have gone. Then someone once said, that is all we had. You know? So let's also go into this. I know you've ever borrowed from banking institutions, but when you're going to get a loan, remember one time I had to tour a number of banks looking for who gives me better interest rates, better terms. You know, do our technical personnel factor that in? That yes, we need monies, but it's not whoever gives. You know, what are your terms, what are your conditions? Why should we hear government officials saying this was a bad loan? We regret, maybe we could have.
But you see, when it comes to borrowing, as Parliament wants to run away from one of its core functions, because that committee itself has powers to either give that approval for government to borrow or not. So it's very absurd to hear Parliament say, oh, we cannot do anything. And yet, that cardinal function is with them. The Minister of Finance cannot go and borrow on behalf of this country without Parliament approving such a loan. So everything that it's lined with debt, borrowing, goes through Parliament. So that means our parliamentarians are failing. Because the minister could have sourced money somewhere and say, this is the money that we have and we intend to get. But as Parliament scrutinizes and identify those gaps and loopholes and say, I think this money is not worth borrowing, so you cannot commit Uganda. But it's this same Parliament again who go ahead and approve, then later on come back and start crying as these common Ugandans and say, but you say government is borrowing bad loans which we can't service timely, but you approved it. So who do we blame here? So our leaders also have a role to play. So much as we are saying we need prudent management of debt, it's not bad to borrow, but how do we manage this debt? That is the question. So they need also to put in frameworks that whips government also. how do you manage these monies that you are borrowing? Because now we need to start seeing certain things come into play. Because if we are to reduce on our appetite for borrowing, one thing that government needs to do, let's live and cut our quota according to our size. We are a country who are living beyond our means. And you know, once you start living beyond your means, definitely you fall into a ditch. The
question would be, how are we living beyond our means as a country?
Because look at...
Because if our expectations by URA in the first quarter, remember URA, its first quarter, it registered a surplus. You know? So I would say, yes, much as we don't finance our budget entirely, we still have to borrow huge capacities, but day by day our revenue is growing. And if some of these we must borrow to put in place what is going to enable us finance our budget more and national development, then...
You see, the problem is, yes, URA is collecting money, but as a country, we have expenditures. The cost of running this government is so
cost
high.
Of administration.
Cost of administration. For example, just have a look, 6.4 trillion of this budget which is coming 23-24. It's going for salaries and wages, 6.4 trillion. That's a huge chunk. So now that calls to question, government has lots of entities, ministries, departments and agencies that have duplicated functions. And there was a time that they brought it on table that they are going to rationalize these agencies. Now the question is, how far have you gone with rationalization? Because that would save us some money. Because once we reduce on this duplication of functions, we downsize the cost of administration. That means we rationalize these agencies. We go even to parliament, 500 MPs. What for? We need to also downsize. So once we start downsizing and reduce on the cost of administration, definitely whatever would be collecting would fit within our margins. But if the cost of administration does not get down, trust me, even if URA milks each and every Ugandan to bring into the tax bracket. Remember, we have a very informal economy. Close to 51% of our economy is informal. So now getting these informal people to pay tax is a challenge. The only tax you can administer to them easily is indirect taxes. But the direct taxes, it's very hard to give it to them. And you know, indirect taxes reaches a certain limit that becomes really very hard to also administer. People will start falling off. They look for substitutes. Because if you are putting prices on sugar all the time, taxes on sugar, or beer, someone will start dropping off and say, I don't need to consume these products anymore. So that also has a ripple effect on the poor. So one easy way, let's look at the cost of administration, bring it down. We improve on our public investment management as a country. Then if we are to invest, let's invest in productive sectors of this economy. The monies that we shall be borrowing, let it go to really good use. We put in sectors that once we put in money there, there are returns. Are you saying? So that once this comes up, now we're in position to tax these sectors and get more money off them. But if you borrow and dump in sectors which are not productive, you're not going to get much return. So now that's where we need to go. Then address leakages. So much of our money is lost. Because it's like having a basket, you go and fetch water in a basket.
Of course, there are a number of holes.
Water just keeps on getting off. So that's the situation also we are in. Leakages are so many. Now, the leakages are in form of corruption. As a country, we are very corrupt. I'm sad to say that, but we are corrupt, and you can see what is being gathered, we lose through corruption. And corruption benefits a few. And yet so many contribute to that basket. And this corruption comes in very many forms. Just look at leakages within URA. There was a very interesting report that came out in 2021 in regards to VAT leakages. So much is being lost in that, where people under-declare. how much they have bought maybe something, but they want a refund in terms of that refund. So now those are some of the loopholes which we have in this country. URA has invested in so many things. We have scanners, everything, but tax education, so many has been done. But even if we do all this and we don't close the gaps where we have this hemorrhage, we are losing so much. So much as we push to collect, we should also have a deep reflection, reduce on our cost of administration, reduce on leakages, improve on where we invest our monies in. That is critical.
To our priorities.
Yes, because look at automation of the tax collection processes. This yields a lot because URA's collection, if you look at the new reforms that brought the IFRIS, the electronic receipting systems, they're getting money. Even local governments, right now, if you go to local governments, you'll be surprised. I, for one, I was surprised. Early this year, we had the local government budget consultation workshops. We participated in a civil society. And what came through was local governments pleading to have automated systems. You can imagine. And yet before, the perception is money is being receipted and put in their own pockets at local government. But right now they're crying for
automation.
Automation, because the few local governments that were automated in terms of revenue collection, because it's one of the reforms, you can see how much they are putting into their basket. There has been tremendous improvement. That means they were closing the leakages that was being lost through direct receipting. Someone just walks into a market, receipts, and puts in his pocket, and only little comes to government. But when the automated systems, so much money was being realized by these local governments. So another option would be, can we automate our revenue collection? All local governments. It's very costly, but it's something which is very progressive. Because once you address that, at least you know, locally you are mobilizing more, and it reduces on what you would have borrowed from out.
Well, we are still with Patrick, an economist from Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, and we are looking at funding of the budget for 2023-2024, where government proposes to borrow that is 9.6 trillion. If this is borrowed, what is its impact, and how best can we ensure that we reduce on this borrowing? Now, one of the things, Patrick, you talked about is having a wider tax base and bring in the informal sector. I've seen government struggling with this. Let me give you one of the areas. When we went on people that have commercial buildings to be paying. For example, if you have rentals, leave alone these in town that are cases that are easy to do that. That tax, property tax, this has been a challenge to collect. When you go to the Juakalis, when you go to these sectors, how do we widen that? The burden does not rely on the about 2 million, that is taxpayers, just including companies and individuals, because there is so much out there that is not taxed. Yet, the whole burden is relying on a few entities or persons that are paying tax. So we are missing so much. Maybe that would use to fund our budget and reduce on the levels of borrowing.
You see, the cost of tax, as in tax administration, is something which, you see, even if you look at, let's look at the capacity of URA. URA over the years has been recruiting and building capacity of their staff to administer tax, carry out enforcement, but still, if you look at that number, it's still low. The number of tax officers in URA, I think they cannot enforce across board. So that means we still have a challenge in tax administration. Now, the issue comes in tax education. You mentioned about the rental income tax. This was a new tax that was introduced, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, but it has not picked up the way maybe URA had envisioned. Reason being, not so many of us are aware about this tax. And how do they also what? Comply. Because there is being aware, like, this is a tax I should pay. I'm a landlord. But how should I pay it? I have no idea. Much as I could be willing to pay. So we need more of tax education, because since most, the informal sector is really huge. Now if you go to the team down there in downtown, these are potential taxpayers. But how many of them have TIN numbers? And how many of them are aware that they should be having TIN numbers and the processes of having a TIN number? So tax education is still lacking. And also enforcement. Because much as we educate, we also need to enforce. So that those who should be paying should pay. And they should pay the right amount. You know, there is paying tax, but you are underpaying, and you're not paying the right amount. You know, human beings, we try looking for
definitely, because you only pay tax, our viewers, on profits made.
Yes.
That's why, actually, I think as the deadline for filing returns expired, it expired.
Yes.
I think you had up to 31st.
Yeah.
So it expired. That's why URA tells you, file your returns in time, for them to look through and know how much tax you're supposed to pay. If you didn't, of course, there are fines and all that. But many Ugandans, the value of tax education is letting them appreciate. Because, of course, if you're going to pay taxes off your profits, that means there is something, there's a percentage of your profits that is going to perform your national obligation as a good citizen to government. So here you need to sensitize Ugandans to know that, yes, if your profit maybe is about 3 million, and you're required maybe to cough $1 million off. Because if you evade tax, some people think you're maximizing profit.
But you see, one thing that really needs to come out, I don't think we don't want to pay tax.
Sure.
I don't
know
so.
If you're in business. And
No. Let me tell you, what really needs to come out clear, what you put in, you should see its result. That's one thing that government should focus on also as well. They say, as you whip people to contribute into the basket, let them see the value. Because it hurts that I put in money into the coffers, but I don't see or realize value for money. So there should be that strong correlation that as citizens put in, we see also value for money in terms of quality service delivery. Because that would also motivate someone, and becomes very easy as you are educating taxpayers and say, please pay your taxes, you will be guaranteed of quality of care, quality education. But if you don't see that being reflected in the quality of education, the quality of health care, the quality of roads, definitely people get demoralized. And as such, they may not be willing to contribute. So there should be that balance. As we put in, let it also be realized somewhere. Because if we don't do that, we're also cheating the citizens. Because it hurts my hard-earned money. Someone is swindling that money. So you see, now that is where the education, the tax education should go beyond saying pay your taxes. Pay your taxes, but we also want to see value, account to the citizens. What has their money done? Because if that kind of accountability is lacking, you may not realize. So now that is the kind of message we need to be pushing forward. As you pay, you also want to see government accounting to citizens in terms of services being delivered.
Well, I love that message. You know, usually URA moves with pay your tax in time to avoid inconveniences, pay your tax in time for government to fulfill its obligations towards you, and most of their field vans, I usually meet them. Sasula omusolo gw'omuvudde government esobola okukola by'erina okukola sasula omusolo gwo weewala okutaataaganyizibwa osigaze ennaku bwe ziti okuba ng'okoze oti. So and then later they of course give us the good news, how much they have been able to collect. Now government sometimes brings out accountability. Budgets reading have allocated, but the president comes and says we've done this, we've been able to do this, to do that. But I think it must be more detailed. Well, when I look at my clock, we just have a few minutes to the end. In less than 2 minutes, let me have your parting shot to Ugandans regarding, of course, issues of the debt burden, but also an encouragement of the obligation. I would be very glad to know that we are domestically funding our budget more compared to the borrowing.
Okay, thank you. As a parting shot, what I would say, and it would be yes, we can't run away from debt. But what we need to really pay much attention is what has that money done? Because if we are putting that debt to good use and we are realizing value for money from that debt, definitely the quality of life for Ugandans will improve. But if that is not being done, then definitely we are hitting a ditch. And if we don't reduce on our appetite for borrowing, we may default as a country as well. So let's pray hard that this message sinks to whatever decision maker is out there. As we borrow, let's put that money to good use for us to realize as a country, because everyone is going to contribute, be it me today or my children in future. They're going to pay this debt. So it's better the debt does its work, so that as they pay in future, they also enjoy the fruits of what was borrowed today. So debt utilization is key, and we need to ensure that every Ugandan pay a share of their tax, and also government accounts to the citizens of what that money has done. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Rubangakene Patrick, who is an economist with Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, CSBAG, and their main aim is to advocate for proper and equal budgeting resources for everybody in Uganda. Thank you so much for being with us, and we pray and hope that we shall be able to ensure that we borrow for the right reasons and we put the monies at work through effective monitoring and supervision, but also for Ugandans, that we encourage ourselves to pay tax. It is your obligation to pay tax. And then that money should be used and not stolen. Have a good day. Ruben will be here to take you through sports updates. See you.